friends, welcome back. Today we'll be discussing the ingress of Uranus into the sign of Gemini after over 80 years. And I must say we're going to have our minds blown, considering that Pluto is in the other air sign and the other outer planet, Neptune, is in that fire sign. So there's a lot of movement and possibilities coming up. And I just want to do an overview of the video before we get into it, because I've divided it into 8 subsections. In the first section, we'll just go through over why this transit matters. In the second part, we'll look at the archetype and the symbols of Uranus on its own, and then we'll do that in the third section for the sign of Gemini. And then we're going to bring Uranus into the sign of Gemini, look at it first from the collective perspective, because these are intergenerational planets. And then we're going to look at it in terms of individual interpretations we can make of it. And on the 6th and the 7th point, I'm going to talk about some of the life lessons we can draw from this. As usual, I like to focus on this because I feel that we're born, we're here to experience. And I feel one of our objectives should be about how do I evolve? How do I grow? How do I become more conscious and a better human being? So these transits allow us to evaluate this and to go through the lives happening within our becoming process. And on the last point, I want to touch on what we're leaving behind and what we're moving towards. Because if we take astrology as a way of interpreting the world, these outer planets and their significations tell us huge changes and metamorphosis. So where we end up is not where we used to be. And I want to touch on this. And this video will be timestamped. So if you want to move back and forth, feel free to do so. And just a bit of a housekeeping before we move forward. If you find this video or the content of this channel something of value or something that is of use to you, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And as usual, your comments and your feedbacks are super helpful to me because I'm just starting this channel, as you guys noticed, and your feedback lets me refine in the creative, in the back end of this content making process so that you get what you want to see also, not just what I feel like I want to make. And not to mention, I love having dialogue with you guys and having a way to be able to communicate with you. So please do leave your comments. And for my services, such as chart readings, ongoing counseling sessions, as well as my courses, you can go to parisayazdi.com, or in the description box below, all the links are there, as well as my email if you guys want to get a hold of me personally. Now, without further ado, let us begin. So first, let's look at why this transit matters. How does that matter? When it comes to the 3 outer planets, and when they start going into a new sign, it's worth looking at them for 3 primary reasons. For one, they're super long cycles. They take a very long time to do one full revolution around the sun. That's why the last time Uranus was in the sign of Gemini, it can go back to over 8 decades. Secondly, because of this long duration, they're not talking about fleeting moods and modes, trends. They're literally generational turning points. And lastly, when it comes to the individual basis, they have long-term personal relevance because they change us in ways that qualifies as our personal evolution. So these 3 points are super important as to why it matters to look at this transit. And when Uranus enters a sign, it's not like Mercury, Venus, or even Jupiter that takes a year, or even Saturn that takes 2.5 years. Uranus will take its sweet little time. It takes about 8 years to transit through a sign. So when Uranus passes through a sign, it doesn't just pass through. Like all the other 7 traditional planets, they sit, settle, and simmer in a sign. They actually rewire how that sign is working and being operationalized in that sphere of our lives. Look at where the sign of Gemini is sitting in your chart in terms of the house that is sitting in. Uranus is coming there to revolutionize that part of your chart, the significations of that house, through the sign of Gemini and how Gemini operationalizes things. So Uranus is not going to be denoting subtle changes. It's a systemic realignment of that house. You can call it a regime change. A favorite topic of our media today, regime change. And this ingress of Uranus is also saying a lot about generational changes. Again, not in mood and surface trends, but in the deeper architecture of our minds, how we think, how words are transmitted, how identities form and dissolve in the space between incoming and outgoing thoughts. And Uranus, like all the other 3 outer planets in general, create turning points from a social and a cultural perspective. You know how we have generational names like Generation X, Millennials, Gen Z. These generations can't be defined until that phase is over. And then we look back and we're like, oh, that's what that generation was about. The outer planets have a similar kind of a feeling. It's hard to define them till they're done with whatever it was that they were doing. But once when it's all said and done, the imprints that they leave behind is unmistakable. For instance, on an individual level too, like by the time this Uranus moves out of Gemini, we'll come to see that our nervous system has been reconfigured and reconditioned in a different way. I know, for example, when Uranus was in the sign of Taurus, for me personally, how I perceived stability, safety, security, it just went through such a mess that by the time I came out of it, I've noticed that I have redefined these concepts for myself. So having your nervous system transformed is basically how you're going to act and react in the world, right? So these are some of the things we can look at. We can also, it's going to change how we think, how we speak, how we connect, and in general, how we shape reality and how reality comes to shape us. And if you think about it, if these things change, our narrative, our human narrative, individually and collectively will change. And that's why who we are going into this transit is not necessarily who comes out of it on the other end of this transit. And we got to remember, because the sign of Gemini is related to the intellect and how we use our intellect and cognition to relate to others, Uranus in Gemini is saying that, you know what? I'm going to initiate a kind of a revolution that's going to change human beings' ways of establishing connection, how they connect to the world around them. And like all Uranian events, Uranus is a rebellious planet. It will not be asking for permission. It will not be asking for governmental consent of, can I do this or can I not do this? It will come in with a brand new revolutionary script, and it will jolt us over and over till we shake our own old scripts. I would argue all of this jolting and shaking by Uranus is a way of having us wake up, become awakened, become conscious of the way we have these stories that are very strict and binary. The ideas that were given in the past, and we're just holding on to them without wanting to let them go. All that shaking and all that jolting is going to loosen our grip on those narratives. In some ways, considering Pluto is in the sign of Aquarius, trining Uranus by sign and by degrees right off the get-go in Gemini, these are not just small interruptions. They are big evolutionary leaps. And in some ways, it's going to give us a new concept of what it actually means to evolve. So we're going to get into all of this, but let's start with the archetype of Uranus as disruption and divine rupture. We can think of Uranus as the definition of evolution through disruption. And it's important to remember this planet doesn't reform. It breaks and shatters the old. Whenever Uranus moves in somewhere, we always have this perception of continuity of the past to the present, therefore that must be the future. Uranus breaks this illusion of continuity. Everything that's been stabilized, ritualized, sanctified, or inherited without question. Uranus comes in and suddenly all of it feels incoherent. And it's important to remember Uranus is not coming in to break structures just to create chaos and havoc. It's not chaos for its own sake, but it's coming in to reveal how some old structures are not the truth of what can be in the future. It's showing us that that was only a temporary containment that could contain the truth of some other times that's related to the past. This is not the scaffolding for the future. So I have no choice but to break it down. So Uranus always creates rupture in our timelines. It fractures our chronologies. It opens portals to unbounded structures. That's why Uranus represents the unexpected and that which is not yet integrated. And that's where the chaos is actually coming from. We don't have a sense of coherence. If we have a narrative where there's no timeline, so this happened, that happened, it's like me telling you a story without using the concept of time in constructing my sentences. There's incoherence in it. So that's why it feels chaotic and disruptive. But if we think about it metaphysically, Uranus is the divine order beyond the form. For example, while Saturn defines time, it's very linear, it's very chronological. It's talking about the sequencing of action, reaction. Saturn is the structure of time, hence related to karma, cause and effect. That's very linear. It's rational. Uranus comes to interrupt this. Uranus is like the anomaly that jolts and breaks repetition of time's linear unfolding. And it's in this way that Uranus comes to decondition ourselves, our souls, from old scripts. And when we don't have a sense of continuity, we don't have a narrative. If we don't have a narrative, what we're experiencing does not feel personal to us. This is one of the reasons why some things in life feel personal, some things feel impersonal. You can see someone that you love and know and have that narrative of continuity with them. They die and your heart breaks. And then you watch on TV someone getting murdered brutally. You feel something, but it's not the same way. It's impersonal because you don't have that continuous narrative with them. So when Uranus brings these kinds of disruptions and creates disruption in our sense of continuity, it actually activates our impersonal mind. It's like a mind that sees from the above. It's not in the story. It's like a mind that speaks in flashes because, again, you don't have that sense of continuity. And it's a mind that doesn't wait for approvals or for proof of something. It's like lightning, poof, hits, it's gone. And that's why I was saying earlier, Uranus is not about reform. So during this time, for example, the whole AI phenomenon, in terms of how fast it's moving, do we need government regulations? With Uranus here, the movement is so fast that government regulations, for example, can't keep up. But it's just important to have a feeling for this Uranus archetype. For example, Uranus can be seen as the archetype of the awakener. And this archetype is about the one who brings new vision, but through destabilization. Or it can be the archetype of the rebel that refuses to accept the script of belonging that was handed to it. What it prefers, it will stir things up, it will create havoc, whatever it takes to have authentic sovereignty. It doesn't want to follow the norm and the normative ways just because that's how it's always been. We can also think of Uranus as the electric mind. It's a mind that's non-linear. It has non-linear insights. It has future logic. It's futuristic. And we can also look at Uranus as the archetype of the alien. And one way to look at alien, I don't mean like alien coming from other planets, but alien in terms of unintegrated frequencies that don't fit yet. And not because it's flawed, but because it is from the future. It doesn't have its continuity in our previous narratives. Generally, the frequency, for lack of a better word, I'm using the word frequency, but you can replace it with ways of Uranus, ways of being. But Uranus's frequency is always beyond what can be assimilated in the now. So it's hard to understand it. And it's also important to understand when we don't have integration, we are naturally talking about shadows. So this planet comes with plenty of its own shadow sides. And one of those is Uranus can be a rebel without a cause, rebellion without meaning, or simply to oppose for the sake of opposition because I don't want the old. I remember 1979 revolution in Iran when it happened. And this actually applies to a lot of revolutions around the world. People know what they don't want, but they don't necessarily and exactly know what they want in its placement. So this is a case of be careful what you want or what you wish for. Because if you don't want the old and you want the new, you better have it defined. Another shadow side of this planet is having a kind of an addiction to chaos. Disruption becomes one's core identity. That's how you have a sense of meaning and a sense of self. There can also be emotional disconnection, and usually this is masked as intelligence. You see this often in the realm of technology and the creators of technology. There's this over-rationalization of why this technology is good, for example. And I don't disagree with many of the things that they say in terms of why is it good, but there's an emotional disconnection of all of the disruptions that it will create. It's at least something to take into consideration. And just to move past the shadows for a second, it's also worth remembering Uranus's mythology. In his myth, he was the primordial god of the sky, which means it's representing that space that is vast, generative, and unbounded. And if you remember, Uranus was overthrown by his own son, Saturn. Saturn, who becomes the god of time and all kinds of bounded structures. And you can tell if we say that existence works in cycles and there's a cyclical nature to existence, this sets the stage for a cosmic return. And because Uranus, if Saturn is the structure and Saturn is time, and Uranus is the father of Saturn, that means Uranus is the force that comes before the form. And inevitably, it has to return to challenge the form and the structure, which is Saturn. And what is the planet that comes after Saturn in the order of the planets? Saturn, Uranus. And whenever we talk about Uranus or encountering Uranus in a chart, talking about its archetype, we're talking about being dislodged from certainty. But in the wake of that dislocation, a profound question always arises with Uranus. And that's a question or realization, and that is understanding that where you thought you actually belong, you never actually really belong there. You were just following a form, a format, a structure. So that part of Uranus is always about liberation and freeing one from the way one is bound in ways that one perhaps should not be bound. And with that said, let's now move to describing the sign of Gemini and its environment. And we can describe Gemini as the mutable messenger between worlds. And once we've discussed Gemini, we'll bring Uranus into the sign of Gemini, as I mentioned earlier. First thing to remember about Gemini. The sign of Gemini, its function is not about destinations. Gemini is about passages. It doesn't hold, it connects. For instance, Gemini can listen in one language and then respond to you in another language. So it's always standing at some kind of a threshold. It's a shapeshifter with one foot in the known and the other one in potential. And it's constantly translating experiences into cognition and from cognition back into expressions, which then become our experiences. So there's this channel of back and forth in the sign of Gemini. And it's important, this is an air sign, and air does not have mass. So it can move with a lot of freedom. And when we think about the air, we can think about those other qualities of Gemini. It is about breath. It is about spoken word. It is about thought and flight. It's about awareness that circulates without the intent of ever grounding itself or landing somewhere. Gemini is all about keeping information alive through motion. Gemini is the principle of exchange, and not just of data or just perception, but of meaning and identification too. Another point to remember is about Gemini's neutrality. It's neither male nor female, and this makes the sign of Gemini uniquely elusive. As a neuter sign, Gemini does not declare itself as active or passive, assertive or receptive. Instead, it just remains fluid. It's capable of mimicry, adaptation, it's very flexible, and it's all about observation without immersion. It's also a very mental sign, and for this reason, it lacks the emotional components. And Gemini will always process with this absolute refusal to cling onto anything. And all of this lends it the quality of a translator. It's about one who can move between realities without getting trapped in one or the other. It doesn't get enclosed or become bound by it. And now let's look at a few of the archetypes that can be related to the sign of Gemini. This sounds funny, but could be an archetype of a mirror. Like Gemini can mirror you and it can reflect what you're saying and what you're doing, like monkey see, monkey do. But the doer in the mirror, for example, cannot be defined. It remains undefined. Like it's a reflection of you, but it's not you, but it's doing the same thing that you're doing. It has that kind of a feel. It's like the way DNA replicates itself through the RNA. We can also say Gemini can be seen as the archetype of the trickster. It's playful, it's subversive, and it's very much able and capable of slipping past categories that are well defined. We can also say that Gemini is the archetype of the shapeshifter, and that comes from its gift of adaptability. But there's a huge shadow point to this part of this archetype as a shapeshifter, and that's a danger of fragmentation because it can't be pinned down. It's this, it's that, and then it's another thing, but it's never really itself. We can also say, lastly, that Gemini can be the archetype of the pollinator because it's always carrying ideas, impressions, and possibilities that are even in between disconnected realms. It's always creating that nexus, that relationality between things so that they can come and have an interaction and an exchange. And it's also remember that the sign of Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So in a lot of ways, it's connected to our nervous system. And if you think about the nervous system, it's connected to prana, the breath of life, the transmission of life into life. We can think of the sign of Gemini in general in terms of what thoughts are. Thoughts as movement, thoughts as transmission, thoughts as translation. We can think of it as speech, but speech as current, this channel of back and forth. And again, like all planets, all signs, we have shadow sides. And the shadow side of Gemini, and it's important to say this because when we bring that rebellious Uranus planet, we got to understand how things can become very murky. So one of the shadow points of Gemini is the self can fragment into disembodied roles or voices or personas. So there's no coherent embodiment of these enactments and performances. There's another thing too. The sign of Gemini is super curious, and curiosity is a beautiful thing in life. It's a sense of wonder. It's a sense of play. But this curiosity can also be a kind of an overstimulation, and it can create a lot of restlessness. Another thing that can happen, speech can become distorted. And what that means is that meaning is becoming disturbed. That means things can be clever but untrue, evasive rather than revealing. And on a last point, I talked about this with Venus in the sign of Gemini. Intimacy can easily be bypassed in the sign of Gemini, and all in the favor of lightness, playfulness. So presence, being still, being here, can be evaded in favor of anything and everything that is novel. At its worst, Gemini escapes embodiment in favor of performance and through performance. Gemini can speak for days upon days. I have my sun in Gemini. I can talk, but I have to remember to feel what I'm talking about. This is one of the problems with Gemini. I can talk, but forget how those things that it's saying what it feels like. Like processing and metabolizing something are two different things. The processing is one step before metabolizing. So this can happen in the sign of Gemini. And a lot of times this has to do with the fact that the sign of Gemini does not want to be pinned down and bounded to one thing. It's of the air element. It wants to be free to move. And because of this sign in general has a tendency or a problem to never stay long enough to know what it really is that is dealing with. And going on to more of the good qualities of Gemini, like the opposing sign, Sagittarius, has a lot to do with knowledge. So Gemini doesn't have to do with knowledge. But what is knowledge without translation of it? The sign of Gemini allows that, is the precursor to knowledge. Gemini helps us to hold multiplicity simultaneously in one place without collapsing, without becoming dogmatic. It's a great quality to be able to mirror another without absorbing another person. It's also a great quality to be able to think without the need to control other people. These are all great qualities that can also come out of Gemini. Now, when we get Uranus coming here, some of these qualities will be hyper accentuated. Some capacities will be tested to the max, and others will be radically transformed. Now let's bring the planet Uranus to the sign of Gemini and see what can come out of this combination. First, we're going to start on the larger social level and then go into the micro perspective of our own individual lives, and we'll move forward from there. I'm going to take a short break. I'll be right back. It'll be like a split second for you guys. All right, guys, I'm back. While brewing that cup of coffee, I was thinking, we've come a long way, man. It's crazy. But then again, we haven't come a long way. Like, from 1806. Humphrey Davis making the first light, the precursor to our light bulb. Photography in 1826, capturing light. Or the first flight by the Wright brothers in 1903, or the first generation of general computing computers in 1945, now to quantum computers. But when you think about it, there's been a lot of innovation in the past 250 years, going to Pluto now here with that kind of a timing. But we are still interfacing with things that were created. What if this time is going to be invention of certain things that we have not had before? So let's just explore Uranus and the sign of Gemini now. So if we say Uranus is about jolting of the mind and Gemini itself is representing something about the mind, we're talking about a fault line now, side by side. And we can think of this not just as a shift, like these tectonic plates that are just gliding against each other. What if we have a fusion between these plates? What if this fusion and this merging creates a kind of an acceleration that we have not seen yet, even though things have been moving super fast? And of course, if this happens, it's going to destabilize a lot of our narrative and that sense of continuity I was talking about earlier. And this will require a new kind of rewiring. And we can see that, okay, Uranus is going to be there for about 8 years. So the rewiring process can also occur. Let's take, for example, one of the qualities attributed to Uranus, which is about rupture of continuity, and through that, insisting on individuation. And then when we think about Gemini, it's about moving between dualities, translating, let's say, thought into language, and language into perception. So if you think about it, their union is kind of like a mutation of minds, which means dismantling of inherited modes of thinking, speaking, connecting, and knowing. This would be a new kind of human revolution that we haven't had yet. That means you think differently, you now speak differently. You connect differently, and hence you know things differently. So what we're talking about here is that linear logic that we're accustomed to is coming to its breaking point. It's as if language itself is being deconstructed. Communication might be becoming electrified. It's hard to explain what these things mean. It's almost like we're just talking in metaphors. That's why I was saying, once when these planets, outer planets, move out of somewhere, we look back and we're like, oh, that's what happened. You can also think of this combination in terms of truth becoming less about coherence and more about the frequency of how something is repeated. And if this happens, the familiar mental structures and the kind of wirings that we do have right now, the ways that we rely on our mind to know the world, which is through our narratives, identities, scripts, and if you think about it, all of them are very binary. They can start to feel very slippery, abstract, or even insufficient. So we could have sudden shifts occur in language, which is about how we speak, how we name things, what we name things, and maybe certain ways and modes of being and thinking that language itself will not right away have the right words to have an expression, description for it. So even the discernment of it, if we can't name something, it's very hard to discern what that thing is. It's its name that's defining its function and what it is operationalizing. So in some ways, we're also talking about shifts in perception, which is talking about fragmentation of our attention, the way that we've been conditioned to pay attention. Or it could be about breaking out of ways that we've been conditioned to have pattern recognition. So we're going to have a kind of a multi-dimensional thinking. Let's say VR is becoming something more prominent. So maybe we're talking about things that are related to VR experiences, VR living. And all of these things will actually start to create rapid shifts in our thought systems, such as rapid mutation of our philosophies, knowledge framework, spiritual frameworks. These are the ways that we understand the world. These are the ways that we have categorized, created a sense of continuity, narrative that has this linear logic, and it feels rational to us. These are models of the mind that we have. And if these things become disrupted, we're talking about having an interruption in how we understand the world. We might even have the categories of the mind that's in each of our minds. The way that thoughts are systemized in our own head change, let's say by external devices. Let's say we have a cloud for our brain. which will have its own, let's say, quote unquote, because I don't know how it would function. I don't know what its name would be. See, I'm already having problems with it. How the cloud external to our mind, which is related to our mind, how it does its filing and its categorization. So it's framing perception in a different way. And therefore, it will create different kinds of thoughts. And here's the problem. If right now, let's say our philosophy, even the way our mind works, because of this coherence and this continuity that we have in our social narrative, in our cultural narrative, because it's all stemming from it, and we all have our tentacles in it, and it has its tentacle in us. We have an agreed upon truth. But if your cloud is categorizing your mind in a different way and mine in a different way, and then that company in a different way, truth will not be agreed upon. It has to be coded in a specific way that might not resemble the way we've become accustomed to coding information, knowledge, perception. So it's being engineered in a different way. And because we don't have access to a common truth in that way, all of these things can also become weaponized. We can say that the thing that we love to use these days, disinformation, will take on a whole new sophistication. And we might be facing questions on a collective level where we're actually personally or collectively asking will be about, how do I stay coherent in a world that no longer shares a common language or a type of understanding? This can also be a time when new thought forms emerge. We can call it the future logic, which is very different the logic of the past. So in some ways, we could interpret Uranus in Gemini, this transit, not as something that just challenges our thoughts, but it challenges the architecture of how we actually think and how we make sense of our thinking, and then how do we translate it, and then how do we transmit it. And if you think about this change, it is inherently uncomfortable. It's scary in a lot of ways, but it can also be liberating. I don't know how. We're going to have to wait and see. We don't have the power of reading a crystal ball, but we human beings historically have been very adaptive. So maybe we will also adapt to all of these changes. Maybe those people who can stay present with it and be adaptable might find a new way of thinking, a new way of being, and to be the possessor of a kind of a mind that they never thought it was possible. And maybe that mind is not even part of their own original biological endowments, but is something that they can now possess. And I'm trying to keep a very straight face because there's a part of my brain that's super sci-fi. When I sit in my bed and I think sometimes about the future and the technologies could come up, they can become very indulgent, and then I enjoy them, and then I have to retract back and actually think through it. Well, what does that mean in terms of its social consequences, in terms of what it means to be human and to be these social beings? It's pretty insane. Like they've just done this report on how AI, these language models, are making us quote unquote dumber. And I think that's the wrong word to use. What it's doing is making us dependent, so that we don't use our own thinking. So we're losing a set of skills because of technology. But this is nothing new. If you tell me right now, I'm going to take all technologies away from you, and you're going to go and figure out how to find fresh source of water, how to farm and know which leaves are edible and which ones are not, how to hunt, I can't do that. Technology has made us very interdependent and dependent on it, where we have lost knowledge. In some ways, we have become dumber. But at the same time, take someone from 1,000 years ago and sit there and try to have a debate with them and have these abstract philosophical discussions, you will come out on the top. So we're sacrificing something for something else. And these new technologies will probably have the same flair. So it's not necessarily that it's making us dumber, but it's making us connected to a wider, multiple nodes of minds where they are thinking for you. So your job becomes something different, and you're going to lose the know-how of how you think a certain way to generate certain thoughts and conclusions, and etc. Maybe a topic for another day. A topic that I'm actually very passionate about. I love technology talks. But let's just get more into like, what does this mean for us individually now? From the personal perspective, we could say maybe the most radical changes will not even be experienced externally the way that I just framed it. But it's just more intimate in terms of what's happening inside of your own mind. Because if your own mind, the way that you think generally about things on a very personal level, if they were to shift and alter very dramatically, your sense of self would become fragmented, your identity would become fragmented. So the self-concept that you've relied on, which was formed through thoughts, memory, beliefs, can begin to glitch out. This is to say that this transit can initiate a mental deconditioning and deconstruction of all the ways the wires were so tightly connected to each other, such as the internal script that you inherited. They just become kind of disjointed and no longer compatible with the ways your mind's being activated today. And I was talking about the nervous system getting hijacked. These kinds of things make us hyper aware and hypersensitive. So the nervous system again coming into play. For example, these changes can be related to the way that you used to tell your own story of this is who I am, this is what I did, this is what I'm all about, this is my purpose in life, this is my passion. All the things that you believe can actually start to feel scripted, outdated, artificial. So it's even the self questioning the self, not believing the self. It's like becoming disjointed, breaking off from the self. And all of these things through these transits can happen through, let's say, a conversation with another person, where that conversation just shatters all of your old assumptions, the way that script was. Or you come across a piece of writing that just rearranges your entire worldview. Or you might be like mid-conversation talking to someone, utter a sentence, and as you're saying it, you're like, this makes zero sense to me. And like, why am I saying this? What is this about? Where is this coming from? So all of these moments are marking a kind of a rewriting of our own internal dialogue, our own ways of thinking. So those categories of the mind can also become destabilized in that way. And we got to remember, Uranus is not like, I'm just going to offer you a subtle upgrade. It initiates rupture and breaks. But it's usually within those breaks that a new kind of a cognition can be born, can come into being. It's like a new mental grid is overtaking the old one. It's a new perception, new way of decoding things, categorizing them. And because Uranus represents individuality, freedom, and liberation, we could give this a positive slant in a way that this is giving birth to a independent thinking mind, not someone who's like a sheep just following through with everything that has ever been said. And that must be the logic because everybody says it. Makes you think outside the box. At its worst, we could say that this is going to make someone or certain people feel very disoriented, fragmented, like they don't belong. That nervous system that's been hijacked is indicating severe anxiety, feeling disembodied or just mentally overstimulated to a point that you don't feel like you have control over yourself and how you need to feel embodied within yourself and your life. So some of the risk that we should be mindful of, identity disintegration is one of them, which is about not knowing how you are when the old frameworks collapse. There can also be hyper-intellectualization of things, which is about escaping what it means to be embodied and just go into the realm of analysis. And if analysis at some point doesn't become embodied and felt, it cannot be integrated. It's just disjointed, fragmented. It's like when you surf the web, you're like reading one thing, you see a hyperlink to another thing, you go to another thing, and then that hyperlink takes to another one. And then within an hour, you're like, what the hell am I doing here? What did I learn? I don't even know what I was reading. This is the risk that we're talking about. Another risk is that we could fall into severe isolation, because if your categories of the mind are changing so severely, you're using language in a different way. You're perceiving yourself in a different way. Now you embody an identity that can't create that nexus and connection with other people. People don't understand your language. So connectivity can become, or authentic connection or intimate connections can be something that gets hurt through this transit. And it's important to remember, Uranus in Gemini is not coming into this sign, into this air sign, this sign that's so related to our cognition and the intellect, to let you know who you are through that. It's coming here to help you discover how to think outside the box and the parameters that create identity, categories, things that come to define your sense of self and your life. And if we can grapple with that part, we can come to understand things that we could not even touch. Now, let's get into some of the existential lessons of this transit. And I say existential because all the combinations we have, even the most brutal ones, are not superfluous. They're not here just to torment us. They're not even here just to create disruption, disturb, destroy. They are necessary modes and ways for us to evolve, for the next thing to come about. So the question now becomes, what do we need to learn and how do we grow with this combination? So let's start here. What we can say with certainty, because this is what Uranus does, Uranus in Gemini will create some sort of a confrontation. Uranus will do this. And that confrontation is most likely with our current sense of coherence and our past narratives. All of our inherited beliefs, inherited stories, and identities that used to give us a sense of stability are going to be confronted. And of course, these narratives provided us consistency, coherency, but they don't have adaptability in them. And the sign of Gemini is all about adaptability. And they're outdated and they will not ensure our survival. So Uranus is going to make sure to destroy those things that stand in the way of evolution and survival. So the first lesson is one of release, which is to let go of a fixed story and the need for a singular story. The second one is about capacity, and that is how to hold a paradox. That means holding dualities and ambiguity without the need to constantly frame them. And initially, this might feel like this combination is creating some sort of a chaos, but that's not what its existential purpose is. It's actually an invitation to create a deeper kind of an order, one that is coming from inner alignment and not outer conformity. The aim of Uranus in Gemini is going to be an independent thinking mind, a sovereign mind. And what does that mean? That means to become fluent in your own inner language, means learning how to speak from the core and the center of yourself, not from some recycled vocabulary that have shaped the perception of many and we just all say it. So this is kind of teaching us authenticity is not a fixed state. It's actually an ongoing, active, honest translation. At its best, it's like the mind is learning how to translate the content of the soul, which is infinite. Thoughts should not be masking it. And all of that breaking and splitting that Uranus does, that rupture, it can create opening, a crevice for us to actually be able to see what's truly within, what needs to be spoken. Challenge here is how do we go from mimicry to authorship? And we see this in large language models too, right? It's like the copyright violations. What's the next step? It's mimicking us. How do we prove authorship? What is the value of it? It's really forcing us to go to the edge of our understanding, to understand something, to adapt something. These are difficult moments right now. We feel like we're being fragmented, but we also have to arrive to like a multivocal coherence and understanding. Like we have to contain contradictions, but at the same time stay coherent. And this is going to be very challenging, not just how to be present, but how do I stay coherent, connected, while everything's changing and there's an acceleration to the change, personally and socially. So there's like this transit, super high voltage. And we have to find places to anchor ourselves somewhere. The mind can be overstimulated at all times, either by having its own thoughts, trying to figure things out on its own terms, or because it's in relation to society and what's happening, and it's trying to figure that out. We can become erratic and disconnected from our own bodies and our own internal way and sense of being and beingness, where we feel anchored and grounded. And one way to do this is not to suppress change, but to create some openings, that breaking thing that Uranus does, breaking from the old, but just breaking enough to allow some emergence of something new, the integration of something new, because whether we like it or not, it's coming. And I would say through the transit of Uranus in Gemini, we really have to learn how to take care of our nervous system, which means to prioritize rest, state the obvious, to understand what stillness is and to practice that, to have practices that bring us physical grounding. Breath work could be helpful, conscious inhaling and exhaling, and reconnecting with the electrical activity of mind and trying to match it to the rhythm of the day, to the rhythm of life. When these two are not in concert, when they don't have correspondence, this causes a lot of internal angst and anxiety. Maybe yoga, maybe walking. For me, it will definitely be weightlifting. So just ways that we become conscious of our nervous system and learn ways of taking care of it becomes something very important. Another thing that's important to do is to track our language. So journaling could become very essential for some of us. And it's not just about documenting things. It's about self-reflection, to have a dialogue with this ever-evolving inner self, how we think, how we process, how we categorize, how the world around us is doing that, how we fit in it, how we don't fit in it. And it's also very important to know what stories we're telling ourselves. If the world changes rapidly, whether if it's internally or externally, one of the best things that we can do is to become active story makers and storytellers. That's the way to stay coherent, to have a sense of continuity, and this allows us to have meaning. And life without meaning, as I say often, is life that feels like it's not worth living. And also active journaling allows us to become more flexible in terms of letting certain things go. And then also understanding what things are worth fighting for and to stay, to make them a part of our life no matter what. Another thing that might be nice is to guard against the seduction of chaos. And chaos has a lot of seduction. For example, too much stimulation, just enough stimulation, coded stimulation. We can call it music. It can be something that we enjoy. But when it becomes overstimulation, we're just talking about noise. For example, we got to differentiate that not every thought is insight. We got to become aware of tech addiction, compulsive scrolling, mental multitasking. And some parts of the technologies that come about may be accentuation of these things. Hence, we got to become super aware. Just because a form of technology is in the world, it doesn't mean that our nervous system has adapted to it. That our life and our lifestyle, the way that is dictated by society, can right away adapt to it. It creates all of these disjunctures and fragmentations, which creates a lot of inner chaos and havoc. And I think another great thing that we can do for ourselves is to choose the people that we come to connect with. The sign of Gemini is a very relational sign. It wants that kind of a connectivity. To choose wisely, to surround ourselves with people who actually value honesty over cleverness, inquiry over performance. It's good to be around people who will challenge our thinking and not to get into that hive mind, which has already become very prominent in society. So this is a time to become a translator of your own thoughts, emotions, intuition. And the work is not really just to think more, but to be more true. And let's just wrap up this video. Going to leave you guys with some final thoughts. So by the time Uranus completes its transit in the sign of Gemini, it will be 2033 to 2034. And the world around us may look very different. But more importantly, we will have also changed in ways that might be very difficult to name it right now until the time comes and we can look back in hindsight. Hindsight 2020, as the saying goes. We can also say that something of our internal architecture will be rewired. The old stories about who we are, how we must speak, what we're allowed to question, I would say most likely will not hold. And not because right now we're wrong, not because society is wrong right now. That's why things have to change that way. But because there's something about the concept of mind that's getting bigger and things have to shift and change to be able to hold that, whether if it's our individual mind or is the multitude of the collective mind within society through technology. And we could also say this transit is not just going to give us new thoughts and ways of thinking. It can teach us a new language of our own inner life. It can be a new way of speaking that is not just scripted for survival. In general, we could say by the end of this transit, it's very likely that we don't necessarily think the same, speak the same, or belong in the same ways. I will leave it off here for now. We will come back to this in the next 8 years many, many times more as Uranus will make conjunctions, aspects, retrogrades, and etc. And I'd love to know your thoughts about how you're thinking about this transit, what you think is on the horizon, And of course, as time goes by, how you guys actually experience it. So please do leave your comments. I'd love to learn from you and see how this is unfolding on ground zero of life. And if you guys want to know how this is unfolding within your own personal birth chart, because it's a unique imprint, unique configuration with all the planetary aspects and where it's sitting and all the divisional charts and etc., you can contact me. All the links are in the description box below. And we'll leave it off here for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.